The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air in Café Nostalgia, a quaint little place with vintage decor and dim lighting. Rain pattered softly against the windows, creating a cozy ambience. Angeline sat by the window, lost in thought as she sipped her cappuccino. The cafe held a special place in her heart. It was here she had spent countless hours with Ian, her first love. Years had passed since their bittersweet parting, yet the memory of him lingered like the scent of her forgotten perfume. Suddenly the bell above the door chimed, announcing a new arrival. Angeline instinctively looked up, her breath catching in her throat. Time seemed to stand still as her eyes met Ian's. He stood there, looking as handsome as she remembered, a mix of surprise and longing in his eyes. Their eyes locked, a silent conversation passing between them, acknowledging the years that had passed and the emotions that still simmered beneath the surface. "Angeline?" Ian's voice was a low murmur, almost hesitant, as if he couldn't believe she was real. A wave of emotions washed over Angeline: shock, disbelief, and a hint of the familiar warmth she had once felt in his presence. "Ian," she breathed, her own voice barely a whisper. A million thoughts raced through her mind, yet she couldn't utter a single word. The air crackled with unspoken words, the bittersweet symphony of their past playing in the silence between them. The familiar melody of their song drifted from the cafe's speakers, the same song that had been their anthem years ago. A wave of nostalgia washed over them, transporting them back to a time of youthful innocence and passionate first love. Ian broke the silence first, his voice a bit strained as he cleared his throat. "It's been a long time," he said, a hint of sadness in his voice. Angeline simply nodded, unable to tear her gaze away from his. The years had been kind to him. He looked more mature, more rugged, but his eyes still held the same warmth, she remembered. "May I?" Ian gestured to the chair across from her, his gaze questioning. Angeline nodded again, her heart pounding in her chest. She watched as he sat down, his movements imbued with a familiar ease that sent shivers down her spine. The years melted away as they fell into an uncomfortable silence, the weight of their shared history pressing down on them. "So," Ian began, attempting to break the ice, "what have you been up to?" His voice was casual, but Angeline could detect a tremor beneath the surface, a reflection of the turmoil she felt within herself. They talked about their lives, their careers, the mundane details they had missed in each other's lives. Each sentence felt loaded, a minefield of unspoken emotions and unaddressed feelings. As they talked, flashbacks of their past intertwined with the present. Angeline saw Ian as the charming young man who had stolen her heart back in high school. She remembered their first date at the carnival, the thrill of the roller coaster rides mirroring the excitement that bubbled within her. She recalled their secret spot by the lake, where they would share dreams and whispered promises under the starlit sky. The flashbacks weren't always filled with joy, they also brought back the pain of their separation. Angeline saw the hurt in Ian's eyes on the day they broke up, the day her family decided to move to a different city. The memory of their tearful goodbye, the feeling of his hand slipping from hers, still sent a pang through her heart. Despite the years that had passed, the raw emotions of their first love lingered, ghosts from their past haunting their present. "Do you ever think about—" Ian began, his voice trailing off. He looked away, his jaw clenched, as if wrestling with unspoken words. Angeline held her breath, her heart pounding against her ribs. "Us?" he finally asked, his voice barely a whisper. The question hung in the air between them, heavy and loaded, demanding an answer she wasn't sure she was ready to give. Sometimes, Angeline confessed, her voice soft, almost inaudible. The cafe, once a symbol of their joyful past, now felt suffocating, the weight of their history pressing down on them with renewed force. The rain had stopped by the time they left the cafe, leaving behind a fresh, earthy scent. They walked in uncomfortable silence, their steps echoing on the wet pavement. Without a word, they gravitated towards the park, their sanctuary in those bygone days. Each step felt like a journey back in time, the familiar sights and sounds reawakening dormant feelings. "Do you remember this?" Ian asked, his voice tinged with nostalgia. He pointed towards a weathered swing set, its paint peeling with age. Angeline smiled sadly. The memory of them sharing a swing, their laughter echoing in the twilight, flashing before her eyes. The park held a million memories, each bench, each tree whispering tales of their shared past. They strolled along the winding path, their hands brushing occasionally, sending sparks of electricity through their bodies. They talked about their lives, their dreams, their regrets. The years of separation seemed to melt away, replaced by a familiar comfort and an unspoken understanding that only they shared. For a brief moment, it felt like they were young again, back in their own little world where nothing else mattered. Section 5. The weight of unspoken words. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the park, the weight of unspoken words hung heavy between them. They reached a clearing, the city skyline stretching before them, a tapestry of twinkling lights against the darkening sky. Ian stopped walking and turned to face Angeline, his eyes reflecting the city's glow. "Angeline," he began, his voice deep and resonant, "what happened between us? It wasn't easy." His words hung in the air, unspoken apologies and regrets lingering between them. Angeline met his gaze, her heart aching with a mixture of sadness and longing. "I know," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I was young, foolish," Ian continued, his voice laced with self-reproach. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration Angeline remembered well. "We were young," Angeline corrected gently. She didn't want to dwell on the past, on who was to blame. The past was done, and all that mattered now was the present moment, the chance to face the unresolved emotions that still simmered between them. Section 6. Confessions under the city lights. As darkness enveloped the city, they found themselves drawn to the familiar comfort of a rooftop bar, the bustling cityscape spread out beneath them like a sea of twinkling lights. The air was alive with the sounds of the city, the distant wail of sirens, the honking of cars, the murmur of conversations blending into a symphony of urban life. "I never stopped thinking about you," Ian confessed, his voice husky with emotion. He gazed at Angeline, his eyes reflecting the city lights, his expression a mixture of vulnerability and longing. "Every time I heard our song, saw a couple laughing, or visited a place we used to go, I thought of you." His words were like a balm to her soul, soothing the old wounds and rekindling the embers of their shared past. Angeline's heart ached with a mixture of joy and trepidation. "Me neither," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. She had tried to move on, to bury her feelings for Ian deep within her heart. But some loves refused to be forgotten. The city lights provided a stunning backdrop for their confessions, the bustling metropolis a silent witness to the reawakening of their love. Driven by a need to escape the city's confines, they embarked on an impromptu road trip to Mount Apo, a place that held special significance for them. The memory of watching the sunrise together from its peak, the world bathed in a golden glow, had stayed with them through the years. As they drove, the landscape changed from urban chaos to tranquil countryside, the air growing cooler and fresher with every passing mile. They reached their destination just as the first rays of dawn painted the sky with hues of pink, orange and purple. Standing on the summit, the world spread out beneath them like a vast, breathtaking canvas. They felt a sense of peace they hadn't experienced in years. The silence was broken only by the sound of their breathing and the gentle chirping of birds. "It's beautiful," Angeline whispered, her voice filled with awe. She wasn't just talking about the scenery, she was talking about the feeling that washed over her, a sense of rightness, of coming home. Ian smiled, his eyes filled with the tenderness she had yearned for. "Just like you," he murmured, his gaze holding hers captive. As the sun climbed higher, bathing the world in its warm light, they talked. They talked about the past, acknowledging their mistakes and regrets without letting them define their present. They talked about the future, their hopes, their dreams, their fears. For the first time in years, they felt truly connected, their hearts beating in sync with the rhythm of the universe. "I know it's a lot to ask," Ian began, his voice hesitant, "but I want to try again, with you." He looked at Angeline, his eyes filled with a sincerity that melted her heart. "I know I hurt you, but I promise to spend every day making it up to you." His words were a vow, a sacred promise made on hallowed ground. Angeline's heart soared with a mixture of hope and trepidation. Could they really erase years of hurt and build something new? Could they recapture the magic of their first love? She looked into Ian's eyes, seeing the man he had become, the man she had always loved, and she knew in her heart that she had to try. As they made their way down the mountain, the echoes of their past followed them, intertwined with the budding hope for a future together. They stopped at familiar places along the way: the roadside diner where they had their first fight, the quaint bookshop where Ian had bought Angeline her favorite novel. Each stop was a reminder of their journey, of the good times and the bad, the laughter and the tears that had shaped their love story. "I'm scared," Angeline confessed, her voice barely audible above the wind whistling through the open car windows. Ian reached for her hand, his touch sending shivers down her spine. "Me too," he admitted, "but we'll face it together. This time, I'm not letting go." His words were a promise, a beacon of hope guiding them towards an uncertain future. Back in the city, the familiar sights and sounds seemed different, as if they were seeing their world through new eyes. They stood on the sidewalk, a comfortable silence settling between them. "So," Ian began, a hint of uncertainty in his voice, "where do we go from here?" The question hung in the air, a question without an easy answer. Angeline took a deep breath, her heart filled with a mix of excitement and trepidation. "Forward," she said, a soft smile gracing her lips. She met Ian's gaze, her eyes shining with renewed hope. Together. And with that, they walked away from the uncertainty of their past and towards a future filled with the promise of love, forgiveness, and a second chance at happiness.